exposing the secret sauce in business-to-business marketing. The TAGLine podcast is where real stories meet proven strategies. Let's elevate your business. Real strategies, real stories, real results. In the business-to-business industry, you're not selling to businesses. It's human to human. We break down what works, what doesn't, and how you can truly stand out. Transparency, credibility, growth. Get a behind-the-scenes look at what drives success in business-to-business marketing. Get ready for the next TAGLine podcast powered by the Abely Group.
Welcome back to the TAGLine podcast. My name is Justin Starboard, and today I am joined by Tony Lopez, the CEO of AVS Life Sciences. Tony, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Justin. I appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. This has been actually a long time coming. I met some of your team, at this point, almost a year ago in Silicon Valley at one of those MedTech trade shows. We were discussing I think they were at one of my talks about crowdfunding, but there's a lot of synergies between us, and I'm so excited to hear more about what you guys do. So I guess let's start there. Talk a little bit about AVS and what it is that you guys do.
Well, to best understand AVS, you want to kind of understand the history of this particular industry that we support, and maybe the story starts there, right? And I can speak from it from very personal experience, because 30 years ago or so, maybe even a few more than that, when I was first starting my career at Johnson & Johnson, we were just early days of what was, called then and still is computer systems validations and computer integrations and bringing technology into automation. In this case, for a medical device company, pharmaceuticals, also biotech as well. But in that space, you started to see the evolution and the introduction of technology, computer systems to help manufacturers make the products that they make, right? Whether it was a device like a suture, or it was a implant like a hip or knee replacement, or it was a pharmaceutical, a drug, or anything like that, working on molecules and so forth. And so what started to evolve from that was the need for companies to have, engineers and scientists who understood the regulatory compliance issues, the FDA compliance issues for pre-submission of documentation, for submission of documentation, seeking clearance on products, for resubmissions on products when you're trying to change maybe the indications of it, et cetera, right? All of that work needed to be validated, right? Because you're submitting to the FDA that you're doing certain things,
right,
and that has to be proven and validated, if you will, for efficacy and so forth and so on. So what came out of that was this industry of needing services, engineering, validation, expert services that companies like J&J, the one that I was operating in, and Ethicon at the time, we would have engineers who knew how to do that and understood the regulatory compliance issues, but oftentimes our projects were larger that required us to bring in additional help to help those projects, be completed on time and bring in expertise that maybe we didn't have as a company. And so that started to bring in companies like what is today AVS, right? AVS is an engineering services company specifically geared to help companies in the MedTech device and the biotech, pharmaceutical, FDA regulated, if you will, right? Regulatory kind of compliance type of companies. That's what we do. We provide those engineering services oftentimes to add to a client's team.
Yep.
And oftentimes those projects are long-term projects in fact, they turn into long-term relationships in many cases, where our engineers are embedded with the engineers and the scientists of the company, sometimes for years, as projects evolve and continue, right? So that's the first thing AVS does, provides those kinds of computer system validations type of work, automation, digital transformation, all the things these days that are tough to do. And you really have to make sure you do them right, because this is kind of important work around what the FDA requires.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And patient
Regulated
safety,
basis. You
patient
definitely,
safety and all that kind of stuff. And the
yeah,
second service that we provide at AVS provides, which is also a very, very critical, important service, is audits. We do regulatory and compliance audits, right? So whether that's a client who says, "Hey, I've kind of gotten an observation by the FDA, or I've been, I'm concerned about maybe a potential upcoming inspection by the FDA. I need you to come in and help me sort of do an audit of my systems and help me make sure that I'm ready to go or where I need to improve and so forth and so on." And we get a lot of that kind of work. In fact, we have over probably close to 150 folks, experts in the company, and that's what they do, right? We get lots of requests from many, many, many clients who recurrently use us because if you imagine some of these big companies, they may have multiple sites, multiple countries that they operate in. They have multiple manufacturing sites, and there's always an ongoing need to do validation and audit work.
sure.
Even within one plant, you may have one process that needs to be, audited, while you may have another part of the plant later on, 3 months from now, another audit required in that process, right? Different products, different processes, and so forth. So we do those things as well. That's in a big nutshell what AVS does.
So, I mean, I think most importantly, you become partners with your clients to be able to understand what it is that they are currently doing, what they need, and then what the regulatory standards are for them to meet, so you can come back to them and
And
carefully.
that's a real important point that you're making, Justin, because essentially, if you and I are running a multinational medical company, device company, pharmaceutical company, where you get shut down or you get an observation by the FDA, it's serious business.
Yeah,
It's not like, you ordered staples from one store, the staples didn't work out too well, so let me just buy them from someplace else.
right.
That's a commodity, right? Not important, not a big deal. But these kinds of things, these kinds of projects, these kinds of regulatory compliance issues are life and death, literally for the company. And if it's not done right, it could be life and death for the patient if
Yeah,
it's not a product that's properly done and cleared and validated and all that sort of thing. So, yes, the companies want to use other partners that they trust, that they have experience with, that have a track record. And in the case of AVS, we've been in business for over 25 years doing this kind of work,
yeah,
right? So we have a reputation of knowing what we're talking about. And also, every company has its own set of processes. While there may be a lot of similarities, companies have different processes. And so, yes, and cultures of how they go about doing their
yeah,
work, right? So, some understanding of how that company operates and the culture and how it expects things to be done, how it expects things to be documented, and so forth, is also helpful. So, that's oftentimes why, in the case of some of our clients, we literally have been embedded with them for over 15 years. We have AVS engineers sitting in those companies for over 15 years because they finish one project and then they migrate to another project and they go to another project. And there is a symbiotic relationship and a partnership that evolves from that, where the client feels lots and lots of confidence that this is the partner that can help me get the projects done, keep me clean, keep me, out of regulatory trouble, and help me to accelerate projects into fruition.
yeah. There's a lot to unpack there, Tony. You-
Yeah.
You've given us a lot to think through. At the end of the day, I sit here in my seat, similar to yours, in working with our clients to articulate and communicate what it is that they do, how they do it, reach their audience properly, especially in a regulated space like medtech. There are things that you can say, and of course, things that you cannot say or claim. Where do you see the intersection of those two things? Where on the marketing side, you need to be able to proclaim that your device can do these things or has the ability to fight something from a biotech standpoint or a pharma standpoint. Where do you see that intersection of marketing and communication, and then being able to articulate to the regulatory bodies like the FDA what the technology is capable of doing. Is there overlap? Is there intersection there?
There is, and it's an important one, right? Because and I have very, very many examples that I can give specifically as to how the interaction goes between, I'll say, the commercial teams and the operational teams that are developing the product, even the R&D teams that are developing the product, because you gotta have to think about the entire life cycle of the product, right? You go from the laboratory, you've developed an example product that we developed years ago, and I was involved with at Ethicon, the first antibacterial suture in the world. Big deal, right? You're developing an antibacterial suture for the first time. And who better than Ethicon to do that? The world leader in sutures, right? So from a laboratory perspective, you got this wonderful petri dish that shows that this suture, when surrounded by microorganisms, actually affects them and doesn't allow the microorganisms to grow on the suture. That's a big deal, clinically speaking, right? So you go from that idea in the R&D and in the lab, and you say, how do I produce that? Right? How do I produce that? So the first step is, can I scale this? Can I produce this in large quantities, right? And what's the manufacturing process? And then you start asking yourself the question earlier in the process, early in the development process, not only can I make it, but how do I prove it? How do I prove its efficacy? How do I prove that it does what it's supposed to do, right? And what can I say about what it does? And you start thinking about those things because you're really starting to think about what's the FDA going to require from me in order for me to be able to show that I'm doing these things. And then you start asking yourself the question, and what will I say to the client, to the user, to the physician in this case, the surgeon in this case who's going to use that suture? What can I say to them? And of course, from the marketing perspective, we want to say this thing is the greatest thing since sliced bread. It can kill any microorganism. We want to make these fabulous claims, right? And then you got the legal and the regulatory folks going, oh, wait, hang on a second. You can't quite make that leap. We can't make that leap, right? So that's where the engineering community, the scientific community, and the commercial community have to kind of put their heads together creatively and say, what is it you're wanting? What's the message you want to say to the world? What would be the ideal message? This suture helps to prevent infections. If I could say that, boy, that'd be fantastic. Well, that's a big, giant stretch. But here's what we can do. And then you start working backwards as to what can we actually prove in the lab? And what can we actually manufacture consistently and efficaciously? And then what can we provide? What evidence can we create that provides the FDA sufficient evidence to say, yep, you can make that claim, right? So the key to all of that I've just said is a real tight communication and an early communication between the commercial teams of what they want to be able to say about something when they finally get to launch this product, and what the scientists and engineers are developing in the lab, and what the manufacturing guys are thinking about how they're going to manufacture. All that should not be done in silos. And oftentimes the companies that fail at that end up paying the price that they say, well, I got a great idea. I can demonstrate it in the lab. One, I can't either produce it or I can't prove it. And I can't say what I really want to say in the market, right? So it's really important that the commercial teams, the engineering teams, the regulatory teams, the legal teams, the compliance teams, and the R&D teams really work early on together and through the cycle of the development work, right? So that there are no surprises.
Yeah.
Right. And then oftentimes what happens is you end up saying, well, initially when we launch, we can make these claims and we can validate and prove these claims. And then later on, as we get more evidence or the product gets into use and you get more clinical studies done and so forth and so on, you may be able to go back and validate other claims, which often happens, right? And you validate those claims and then you go to the FDA and they give you those additional clearances for those claims.
Yeah.
But that only works when the entire cross-functional teams work together early on.
I couldn't agree more, especially generally speaking, sitting on the commercial side of things, wanting to push the envelope to say what is absolutely possible or, in the realm of possibility for whatever the device is. That said, a lot of founders focus heavily on the engineering and the product development side,
Sure.
and maybe
Sure.
even some of the fundraising side,
Sure.
but operational readiness is lacking and often becomes some of its, you alluded to it a moment ago, the major challenges later. What are some of the bigger mistakes that companies have made that you've seen from where you sit?
Well, let's deal with specifically the example you're talking about, which is sort of let's call them the sort of startups, for example, companies that are developing a molecule that, is the next greatest thing, whether it's for cancer, whether it's some other disease that they're dealing with, some revolutionary technology, right? And these brilliant scientists and these founder owners and these smaller entrepreneurial companies that are usually well funded by VCs and so forth, or they're really developing some really cool science,
Yeah.
right? Some really cool stuff. And the mistake again that they often make is not involving those that are going to be helping them to scale that, to take it from the laboratory prototype into a scalable product that I can repeatably make in production and scale in order to be able to supply the market, whatever the market is, right? They often don't connect those two, either because they don't understand that they should, or they don't really understand the regulatory complexities that they're going to eventually face, right? And that's okay. They're great scientists. We have a lot of regulatory experts that can connect what their brilliant minds are trying to do in the lab to say, okay, but as you're doing that in the lab, consider this, and this, and this. And they can sort of guide them through so that in the work that they're doing in the lab, they're considering what will they eventually need down the road, not just for manufacturing and scaling up, but for an FDA clearance type of application, right? For example, if it's a med device, if it's a device, then they could probably use one approach with the FDA. If it's a drug, it's a completely different approach, right? Different levels of clinical studies required and so forth and so on. They may not be expert in that. So they hire companies like AVS who can guide them through that process early on so that they're building that into their protocols from the get-go. The biggest mistake that I've seen is that they don't do that, right? And what ends up happening, they get down, they spend lots of money,
Yeah.
they go down the path, and now they end up with something that they go, well, I can't make that. How do I make that? How do I scale that up? Right. And all of a sudden the value proposition goes out the window.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's probably happened more in the past than it has now. I think most folks who are in this business now are savvy enough and are connected enough to understand that there is a regulatory complexity that they have to consider and a scalability from a manufacturing standpoint that they have to consider. And that oftentimes is as expensive as the initial sort of work around the discovery, right?
And that I actually want to touch on that next, because is that something that holds companies back from starting the engagements as early as possible with is that
Sure.
an element that founders they just don't have the
Yeah,
monetary?
it could be. And I suppose in some cases I've seen it, one or two cases where it was more a financial thing where they said, well, we don't have the money to do that right now. And I said, well, you won't have the money to do it later either because you'll have to redo things, right? So it's a bit of a catch-22. I think they have to. I guess if I had to offer one advice is make sure you're not trying to boil the ocean of what you're trying to develop, right? Sometimes you got a great idea and it can solve a lot of things, but maybe it's best if you sort of think about it in phases, right? What is it that you need to be able to get into a phase one delivery, if you will, an initial offering of a product? Think of it, think of iPhone. If Apple had waited till they had the absolute latest and greatest in anything, they wouldn't launch anything,
Right.
right? They launch a series and then they come back and upgrade it and upgrade. Now, there's a bit of marketing behind that as well. I get it, and it's different than a pharmaceutical product or a drug or a device. But my thought here is that if you don't have the cash, to be able to consider everything, and it's cheaper to involve them early than not,
Well, I was
You know,
going to mention that because you end up spending the money by, to your point, fixing things later.
no
But
doubt,
uh,
no doubt.
uh, at what point, do you get involved, and or AVS does get involved? And I've got to imagine at the beginning, it sort of starts off as, I mean, like our engagements, right? You start off sort of testing the waters, testing and getting to know each other before, as production or as development starts to ramp up. That's when costs also ramp up, but that's also when you're getting the funding, and that's part of the business case anyway, is to include the regulatory pieces because any responsible founder is going to try to do that as early as possible so that you avoid wasting money or wasting that investment later.
Yeah. For me, I would add that it would probably depend on whether you're talking about a predicate device type of issue where there are other similar devices or other similar products in the market already, and you're coming out with something, a better mousetrap, if you will.
Mhm.
And so that's one level of complexity. That's one level of compliance requirements. That's one level of documentation and evidence required, right? If that's the kind of product. If you've got something that's more transformative, first to market or first, in the world kind of thing, that's a whole nother ball of wax, right? That's a whole different complexity and a whole higher level of now evidence required,
Yeah,
right? And clinical evidence required. It depends on, again, whether you're talking about a drug or a device, two different pathways,
yeah,
right? So there's a lot of depends there. The idea, I guess, that is generally true for me is you should think as early as possible in your development cycle, right? You should think as early as possible as to what you think the regulatory pathway is going to be so that you can build in early the types of studies you got to conduct, the types of laboratory work you got to do, right? The types of evidence you should be collecting, how you're collecting the evidence, right? All of that strategy should be built in early, right? And the earlier you do that, then you're less likely to, like you said, have to sort of go back and redo things, or you forgot to do something, or you have to do something you didn't document, you got to go back. So just build it early.
yeah,
Build it as early. And one way to do that again is to spend a little bit of money with some advisory support from an expert, right? Who can come in and alongside with you, uh, see what you're doing, analyze what you're doing, and then give you some advice.
yeah. You mentioned that the iPhone, and that's a great example of technology that's always evolving and pushing forward. At AVS, you guys are really committed to staying on top of technology that's available in MedTech, life sciences, and pharma. And with that also comes changes in regulatory standards, what's expected, and what is required. How do you manage the those things that change all the time? And I know we just went through probably the biggest change in our lifetime through COVID and post-COVID, how things are done. How
Yeah.
did AVS stay on top of all that? How do you continue to push forward and make sure you don't miss those things? Because truly, you're the lifeline for so many of these companies that you're partnered with.
And it isn't easy, right? Because you're right, it is an evolving environment, right? The FDA is constantly sort of learning and evolving themselves, and regulatory, new guidelines and policies are issued. It's sort of like, think of an accountant, right, as doing taxes. Those tax laws changing, they got to stay really on top of it, right? They got to stay connected. They got to be educated, because you and I don't want to have to do that, right? You expect the experts to do that.
Right.
Similar for us. So there's a fair amount of training that needs to go on. There's conferences are a great way to do that, right? A lot of our engineers and our leaders go to conferences in order to stay connected. And at those, you talk about the latest technologies, you talk about the latest trends, you talk about the latest, regulatory policies and guidelines that are coming out. You talk about, and it's not just the FDA, right? Because every part of the world has their own FDA. right? Every country, and we operate internationally. So it really is important that you stay well connected with the trends and guidelines and so forth. So that's first. And we do that through training, we do that through exposure, we do that through, through just staying very, very connected. Second thing you have to really think about these days is AI is the most obvious example, right? There isn't anybody yet who has the answer as to how AI will be able to be utilized, should be utilized, to what level do you allow it, when does the human have to come into it in terms of decision, how far do you go? And the reason I say there isn't anybody who has the perfect answer yet as to how we should use it is because the FDA hasn't figured out exactly how they'll accept us to use it, right? So as the FDA is trying to do similar things, they're trying to say, well, how far can you go? Where can you use AI? Where can't you use AI? Where do we accept it? Where don't we accept it? How much of the engineer's work can you replace with AI? All of that, right? All the tools. How do you validate that the AI is giving you the right answer? Because we all know ChatGPT is not perfect, right? So AI is got to be trained as well. And over time, we'll gain more confidence in it. But that's an example of an evolving technology where the entire industry is sort of working together. And every convention you go to these days, from PDA convention, whatever convention you go to, AI is on the table, right? Everybody's talking about it. And there's a lot of very intelligent people trying to say, here's a model we can use. Here's some ways we can do it. Here's another thing we can do. Here's how AI, here's how I'm using it, right? I've had conversations recently with clients, big ones, big multinational, multi-billion dollar companies that are saying, okay, can you guys help us determine how we will use AI in our validations? Because we have to create some policies around that, right? What will we allow our engineers to do, not do? How do we validate it? How do we document it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Isn't it wild? Yeah, I feel like we could have an entire webinar or a whole series just on, evolving trends and specifically around AI and how it's changed the industry. It's
probably worthwhile doing. I mean, you'd have to find much smarter, much better experts than me because I just know enough to be dangerous about it. You'd have to find people who really know what they're talking about.
I only know enough to ask questions. I don't know the answers to them.
Yeah, exactly. I can ask a lot of questions, but I'm not sure I have the answers to them.
One thing, that is unique about AVS is that you've instilled this partnership network to really help uncover new and novel ideas, companies, and projects that are out there. And here at TAG, we're fortunate to be part of that network. At what there aren't many companies that have the foresight or the thought to do that and look beyond just traditional sales or marketing efforts. What made AVS jump into that and look at that as a viable option for potential ways to earn new business?
Well, it's really not that big a leap if you think about it. I'll give you an example. Think about, a construction company, literally the one that makes the building, right? A construction company that a company, big pharmaceutical, big company, or even a small company that's growing needs to build its new center, right? Where they're going to make their product. And they're going to greenfield it, meaning they're going to build a brand new facility, right? And so they'll have to go out and find themselves an architect and a contractor to build a building, and then they have to find the engineers to pipe it out and all of that work, right? Think about all the work that goes into going from a greenfield to building a regulated environment where you can manufacture medical devices or pharmaceutical type devices or biotech type devices or products. And think about the complexities of that, of going again from the greenfield to the floor itself, to the layout, to the clean room environments that you have to create, all of that, right? Well, the contractor that's going to build the facility is probably a great civil engineering company and a construction company, but they're probably not a good or a great, I'll say, automation company that knows how to make all the equipment you're going to have to put in these laboratories to make the stuff, right? So now you got the contractor who needs an automation company that helps the engineers and the scientists design and build the boxes that are going to go in to make the stuff that they want to make, right? And then you got the other company that has to help you with validation of these systems and computer integrations and digital, bringing all that technology in, right? And so if you really think about it, for AVS to partner or to be together with the construction company to say, hey, you do the construction piece, and then we'll be your partners in doing the other part that needs to be done, right? So not very strange for AVS to say, let's have some alliances, where a construction company says, okay, well, I can do the whole project turnkey for you, right? Because I've got the construction, but I also have the partners that can do this, this, and this, and this, right?
Yeah.
I'll take that to the next level. At the other side of that is the commercial team, right? And the commercial team oftentimes is the one that's designing or thinking about what kind of products do I need in the future, right? For my client to meet my client's needs, right? And so they're generating the need up front and then trying to bring it back. So likewise, having an arrangement or a partnership with a company that focuses more on the commercial end of things and is more connected to that part of the world, and knows with those marketing guys and those sales guys and this whole commercial engine that says, I know what you're trying to build over there. I know a company that can help you do that back here, right? So that's why those partnerships to me make sense. As a client, for many, many years before I got on the board of AVS, I know this industry as a client, right? That's for many, many years. I was the guy that was hiring companies like AVS to help my engineers and scientists do things, right? And one of the best parts for me was to have companies that were connected with each other, could trust each other, could work with each other, could do a complete turnkey. From my perspective, it was like, okay, I got a project that's being managed by individuals who know how to work with each other, have a partnership together. I think that's a cleaner, more elegant solution, right? And it certainly lowers my risk as a client. My risk profile goes down. My level of sleep goes up. Everybody's happy.
From our perspective, similar in that we want to work with folks that are the best at what they do in their space and are good to work with, because as we're helping those founders and startups tell their story, or legacy companies communicate the benefits of the new novel product or device that they're coming out with, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're standing on firm ground and that the work that went into it beforehand. So I'm looking forward to this. I think there's a lot for us each to bring to the table, and opportunity, opportunities that are out there to help these companies have success. And I'm really looking forward to all the come.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, there is, to me, I've always loved this industry, and I'm talking about the sort of the pharmaceutical, healthcare, med device, biotech industry, because when I left the Air Force many, many, many years ago, and I started my corporate career with J&J back in the early 90s, I felt, I felt like you could be in an industry where you could do good and do well for yourself, right? You could do good work and do good stuff that helps people's lives. And I don't mean that I mean that in a sincere way, right? It's embedded in J&J's credo, right? About the idea of take care of moms and take care of surgeons and
Yeah.
patients that take care of, nurses and surgeons that take care of patients, and do good work. Develop products that are safe, efficacious, and help people have a better life, right? From cradle to grave. And I think it's a wonderful thing to be in an industry where you can do that, right? That takes responsibility. You have to be accountable, and you have to be willing to do things absolutely right.
Yeah.
Because people's lives matter, right? Because it matters.
Absolutely.
And so I think what we do is important, right? And people say, well, it's engineering services, it's a consulting engineering services. I'm like, yeah, but it's serving an ultimate purpose of making the product safer for people, and that makes it worthwhile.
Yeah. All right, I'll get you out of here on this. Looking ahead over the next, I'd say 3 to 5 years, what excites you most about the medtech industry, where it's going, where life sciences are headed? Where do you think, companies are going to, what excites you most about those things?
I just think that the technology, the pace of innovation is accelerated and increasingly so now with AI, right? So I just think about truly knowing that in 5, 10, 15, in short 20 years, how people will live and how long they can live and how well they can live, it's going to truly be impacted, right? I mean, yeah, sure. 100 years ago, people lived shorter lives, generally speaking, and maybe not as healthy lives, or some would argue maybe healthier in some ways, right? But the way we can keep people having high quality of life now and longer, right? Where 60 is the new 40 and so forth and so on, right? I really think that we're going to affect and we're going to see positive effects in people's longevity in a significant, dramatic way, right? I know it's been going up over the years as technology's gotten better and science has gotten better, medicine's gotten better. But I think we're going to see a leap forward, right? And so to be again in an industry where, yeah, technology that we use also makes our lives better. But at the end of the day, if your body betrays you, there ain't no technology in the world is going to matter,
That's right.
right? So if we get this to work longer and be healthier longer and give you more productive years, and that's exciting, right? So helping companies like Genentech, like GSK, like Gilead, like many of the other clients that Johnson and Johnson, Merck, all those clients, all those companies that are making products that are going to help you and I and our families, and especially my grandchildren. Because I mean, I just think about my grandchildren who are 10, 8, and 5.
Yeah.
The life expectancy for them and the quality of life is going to be remarkably different and better than maybe what you and I have enjoyed. Right.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more with you on all of those fronts. Where things are headed is incomprehensible in some respects, and
Yeah.
so
And the speed of which that's happening is just it's insane. I hope we manage it well. All right. I hope we manage it well. I hope we don't destroy value rather than improve value. I hope the technology is used, and I think it will be. I think I have enough faith in the human race that we figure things out, and in the end, that's what's exciting. I'm in my early 60s, but I'm hoping that I see all that happening.
yeah.
So
Well, Tony, it's been great getting to know you a little bit more, talking more about what's to come, what you guys do, and how TAG and AVS will move forward together. So I really appreciate you joining me today.
thank you, Justin. It's been a pleasure, and let's do it again.
Yeah, let's make this maybe a little series. We'll do that. How about that?
Hey, there you go. There you go.
On
All
behalf of
right.
my guest today, Tony Lopez, the CEO of AVS Life Sciences, you've been watching and listening to the TAGLine podcast. Until next time.